Welcome to Fuck, Marry, Kill, the podcast where we talk about how everything is reproductive justice and everything can be looked through a reproductive justice lens. And today I am here with my friend Natania Malin Gazek, who is an incredible DEI consultant and educator and works to support workplaces with the process of implementing ethical, justice-oriented systems into practice. And we're going to be talking today about DEI, which is a very hot topic button issue in the news right now. It is one of the many, many things that the Trump administration has decided that they do not like and would like to get rid of, and how that is having a big impact on workplaces, schools, just the general way that we live our lives, especially for marginalized people. So we are going to be talking a little bit about what DEI is, as well as what is going on in the current news cycle around DEI. Natania, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. I think, Simran, thank you so much for having me. This is an honor and a pleasure. Since we're going to be talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think one of the things can be really important to know when you're listening to somebody talk about this topic is what their identities are and how systems of oppression and marginalization and power impact them. So just so you know who you're listening to, I'm a white, anti-Zionist, Jewish, gender expansive woman who has some chronic illnesses that can be disabling sometimes. So those are a few of my identities in terms of the ways that systems of oppression impact me and the ways that I'm an oppressor and part of marginalized groups.
Beautiful. I love that we're starting off on that note of like, okay, if we're doing DEI, let's do DEI.
Yeah, you
like
should
right
know
now.
who you're listening to
Totally.
and what my life experiences are. I think that's important.
I love it. Well, we're going to start with a game of Fuck, Marry, Kill.
All right.
Actually, we're going to play 2 games of Fuck, Marry, Kill.
Amazing.
I came up with 2 because the first one was kind of boring, and then I was like, I'm going to give you 2. So the easy beginning is Fuck, Marry, Kill, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Okay, my truth is I was really hoping you would ask me this.
Really?
And then I was listening to back episodes of the podcast, and you have asked this before.
Oh, shit.
So I was like,
I'm repeating content. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Unfortunately, my answer is I was gonna be and still is the same as the previous guests, which is I'd kill diversity. I think of the 3, it's important, but without the other 2, it can actually be pretty harmful. So bye-bye. I would absolutely fuck inclusion. So much fun. Being included feels really good. Most people love that feeling, so I'm down. And then I'd absolutely marry equity. That is the heart of my work. I often say, like, the crux of my work is about operationalizing equity. And so I think without that, like, that's what you need to have a sustainable relationship with in order for the rest of the things to fall into place. So,
I feel like if 2 of the guests have said the same answer, like that has to be the right answer.
It's objectively correct.
Yeah, like that's the reproductive justice truth, and everything else is untrue and also bad and racist. So,
yeah, there you go. Absolutely. We said it here. It's now correct.
Well, I think my subconscious must have known that I've done it already because I was like, I'm going to come up with the second one. Okay. Fuck,
now
marry,
I'm
kill.
nervous.
Yeah,
Okay.
this one is fresh for you. Fuck, marry, kill, the Black Captain America, Dumbledore secretly being gay, and Target's Pride collection.
Oh my God. Okay. Is Captain America MCU? Yeah, I'm not an MCU person.
The fuck is MCU?
The Marvel.
Marvel Cinematic Universe. Got it.
But I love representation in film. So I'm gonna kill the Target's Pride collection.
It kind of got killed.
It's done. Target's done. Black faith leaders are doing an amazing job of leading that boycott. It is absolutely not going to change the world, but it's totally making progress for corporate America. And Target's out, even though I just bought something from there yesterday. Don't tell.
Totally. And the Pride collection stuff, like I remember seeing it last year and being like, who made this? Like,
it's so Live, Laugh, Lesbian.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Live, Laugh, Lesbian. I do have the gender fluid mug. I will say that.
Yeah.
I fuck with the gender fluid mug.
Yeah, look, it's fine. But if we got to kill one of these things, Target's out. Remind me the other 2.
Black Captain America,
Yep.
and Dumbledore secretly being gay.
Okay. I think I'll fuck Dumbledore secretly being gay because J.K. Rowling is a TERF.
Yeah.
So I'd like have some fun with that for a minute, but I don't need a long-term situation. I do love Dumbledore though.
Yeah.
And so I love the movie version of Dumbledore is how I justify that for myself. And we'll marry Black Captain America. Go representation in film. Capitalism isn't going to solve anything, but it's just so nice for people in marginalized groups to see themselves represented on screen.
I don't think the gay Dumbledore wants to fuck you. I think gay Dumbledore might be not interested.
Okay, maybe spiritually though. I'm gonna fucking
Gay Dumbledore's like, did you not hear me? I said I was gay and Dumbledore.
Haven't you heard of like, listen, the definition of sex, we don't need to be so limited about what fucking is. It can be a spiritual experience between two people who are just having some beautiful non-physical intimacy.
Spiritual tantric sex.
There
with
you go.
Gay Dumbledore.
Gay Dumbledore and I are really getting down with our brains, okay?
It's a beautiful conversation that almost feels sexual, sensual even.
Exactly.
I love that. I think that's perfect.
Thank
and
you.
Black Captain America's hot also.
Oh, absolutely.
there's that.
Yes.
Okay, beautiful. So let's start with the basics. What is DEI?
I'm so glad we're starting with this because we use this term to talk about so many different things and so many different kinds of work. And we have a saying in Jewish culture, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. I think it's the same thing with DEI work, which is if you ask 100 different DEI consultants what diversity, equity, and inclusion is, you'll get 100 different answers. So here's one answer from one DEI consultant that when I'm talking about DEI in this conversation, here's what I mean. When I talk about diversity, I'm talking about the presence of difference in a group. Specifically with people, right? We're talking about differences of demographic identity, and specifically in workplaces. When we talk about diverse workplaces, we're talking about workplaces where we have lots of different kinds of identity represented among staff. Pretty simple. When we talk about equity, look in the dictionary, we're talking about the quality of like being fair or impartial, or some might even say just, right? If we're being really ambitious about it. And at work, what that usually means is that we're talking about processes, systems that a company is consistently engaging with to ensure that all the staff at that organization have the opportunities they want to do things like grow and contribute and develop, regardless of those identities that we're talking about when we're talking about diversity. And finally, for inclusion, that definition I think is the most straightforward, right? When I'm playing with one of my nibblings and we're playing with Legos and there's some Legos in the container and some on the floor, and I pick a Lego up from the floor and I put it in the box, I have included the Lego in the box, right? With human beings, it's a little more complicated than that because it's about feelings, but it's really making a person or thing part of a group. And so at work, that means that people feel like they're part of the cultural group of the workplace.
Can you explain what a nibbling is? I have a friend who listens to the show because he loves me and I very much appreciate it, but like he's just some guy. And so whenever I'm doing this show, I think about from his perspective, would he understand everything that I'm saying right now? And so nibbling is one that we're going to define.
Thank you for asking. I shouldn't have thrown that term out without defining it because a lot of people don't know. Nibbling is a gender neutral term for the children of your siblings. Where we get that from. So nieces, nephews, non-binary children of one's siblings. And in my case, I use the term to also describe the children of my chosen siblings as well.
Very cute. Okay, so yes, like nieces and nephews doesn't leave a lot of room.
because there's not, like, non-binary kids in there also, and also like who needs 2 words when you can just use one?
Totally, and it's cute.
Yeah.
And it's adorable.
Yeah. What I don't like, and I will say for anybody listening to this who like has some ideas, or even in this room, the parallel to nibbling is apparently pibbling.
Wait.
So they would refer to me as their pibbling.
Nah, I don't like that.
I hate it.
I don't
think
like
it's
that.
the ugliest word.
Yeah.
I want a different one.
Yeah.
So I'm on the market for a gender neutral term for the siblings of your parents. If anybody hasn't.
Okay, there you go. Comment below what you want as a reply. Because I've never heard pibbling before and I do hate it.
Yeah,
so.
DM me on Instagram, _strategy. I will take your submissions.
We're looking for answers here. So I feel like I have a clear understanding of the words diversity, equity, and inclusion, but I want to know really like what does that actually look like? Like what does your day-to-day look like? What does it look like to actually be implementing DEI in your workplace?
Yes. Okay, let's get into it. So when we talk about doing the work of diversity, of making workplaces more diverse, I think this is a really important one for a couple of reasons. One is that white people, love to talk about diversity of thought, diversity of perspective, right? I don't really care about that so much.
Yeah.
I'm in this work because the air we breathe is systemic oppression. And I'm interested in helping create systems that stop perpetuating that in our workplaces. And what that means is when I talk about diversity, I'm talking about, do we see representation in our workplaces of historically underrepresented, oppressed, and underestimated demographic groups? That's really hard because, especially our white collar workplaces, were not designed for those groups to exist in, right? Our white collar workplaces were designed for straight, white Christian men who had a wife at home who was doing all of the life maintenance work for them that now most of us have to do for ourselves while also maintaining jobs to pay for our lives, right? So when we talk about diversity, for me with my clients, that is the work of making sure that our staff represent all of the demographic groups that we think it's important for our staff to represent, and that our workplaces are accessible to those groups. And we do a lot of that work through adjusting our hiring and recruiting processes, but that's also work around retention, right? It's not enough to just bring somebody in. We need to make sure that our workplace is actually a place where they want to be and can thrive, which gets us into the equity piece. So when I'm doing equity work with my clients, we're thinking about what are the systems that we need to put in place, understanding that the default actually is inequitable, right? So if I was just you and I were gonna sit down right now and just decide that we want to create a brand new company, we're both very well-intentioned people, right? We might say we like our values, but that's not enough. That's not enough to create a workplace that is going to treat people well. We have to be really intentional because capitalism is not a system that is set up to treat people well. Right. So equity is the work of creating those systems to counteract systemic oppression that we would otherwise be perpetuating. And that gets us to inclusion. So if we're trying to bring in people from historically marginalized groups who otherwise wouldn't get there because the system isn't set up to bring them in, and we're trying to treat them well through these systems that are counteracting systemic oppression, then ideally what we want is an inclusive workplace. And that, in my work, means helping clients create workplaces where people with all of those different demographic identities feel valued, feel welcomed, and are really in meaningful and substantial ways actually leveraged for learning and informing better business decisions. So are playing a really meaningful role in pursuing the organization's mission. And that's a lot of different kinds of work that go into that. But it's tactical and oftentimes really nerdy and boring, right? It's like systemic work.
Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate that perspective around like if racism and capitalism and homophobia and all those things are just the air that we're swimming in and are the default for all of this, you have to be intentional. Like DEI work is necessary because otherwise those groups will not be included.
Exactly.
Those groups will not feel like they're having an equitable environment to work at. And so like DEI is a necessity in order to allow people to be included in the workplace. Otherwise the default is below that.
Exactly. Even if you're not overtly racist.
Right.
Right? It's not about your beliefs. It's about the systems that are in motion that we are just part of because we're existing in this society.
So when you're talking about, this DEI process, we had a continuing education session through Sister Song where Natania kind of talked about how to operationalize reproductive justice or operationalize DEI into a workplace and share how to like bring reproductive justice values into your workplace and how to actually tangibly create those environments. And what I really liked about your examples was just how like systemic and tangible they were. Like the word audit was in there, the word data, like it wasn't just like, oh, like be nice to the people around you, or like I feel like, or like the one-off trainings that I feel like I hear about a lot. Like they were extremely practical solutions for how we can actually make changes in the policies of an organization that will lead to a better environment for marginalized people. And I really just thought, I was just thinking back to the DEI work that I've seen in the past in colleges and stuff, and it all felt a little bit more like conceptual. Which is not to say that's not useful too. Like I think that having those discussions and bringing people together is good, but yours feels like it's built something that really lasts, right? And so I would love to hear more about those specific tangible actions that people can be doing.
Absolutely. I'd love to tell you about them. And before I do, I want to raise up something that you just said, which is as a addendum to my definitions of DEI, which is that you were talking about the impact of this work on marginalized people, which I love that terminology. And I just want to raise up for your listeners that Simran didn't say for diverse people. And That's awesome. I'm sure you've heard people referred to as like, that is a diverse candidate.
Yeah.
Right. I think, like, for your listeners, if you take nothing else away from this podcast, let it be that is such a useless term.
Totally.
And contributes to so much harm. And if we could just say instead, like, oh, we have a woman applying for a team that is all men, or we have a disabled person applying to a team that has all temporarily able-bodied people on it, right? Or this person is Black, right? To be able to say that is really important, to be able to have accurate conversations about what's actually going on, to be able to identify the kinds of diversity that are missing on our teams, and to be able to treat people with dignity, right? Diverse is a euphemism in those cases. And if you're not willing to say about me that I'm a disabled person, well, that's telling me that you think that that's some kind of a bad word to use, and that part of my identity isn't okay to say out loud, which I'm using that word right now. It's a totally fine word to use to describe me, right? And so if someone refers to me as a diverse candidate because of any of my identities that are part of marginalized groups, you're the person is perpetuating that oppression. Yeah. And so I just want to lift up, like, marginalized people, great. Like, people with X identity, awesome. Let's keep being specific in our language. I think it's so important for the conversation.
Yeah, and I've always thought about, with that diversity focused mindset, how are we actually allowing people to have safe environments that are with people who look like them, people who have the same identities as them? Like, if we're diverse, like, can you diversify the Black church and be like, I'm gonna bring, like, is diversity the goal? You can, but like, yeah, like, is diversity always the goal?
No.
Like, if you're in environments, like, if you're like I'm South Asian, if I had like a South Asian group and then was like, guys, we got to get diverse, we really got to get like 4 white people in here and 4 like it's just like, that's not always the goal, right? Like, the goal is to create environments where people can build understanding, and sometimes diversity, especially in workplaces, is really important to that. But like, Sister Song in some ways is not a diverse workplace. Like, we are a all Black and brown workplace, except for my boy Andrew. And he's our white finance director, and we love him. But like, overall, we're not a quote unquote diverse workplace, because that's not always the goal for what kind of work you're doing, right?
Well, yes, and I think what I hear you raising up is that in certain places, some kinds of homogeneity are hugely beneficial,
right? And
some kinds aren't. So I'm not going to use the Black church as an example because I'm not part of the Black church, but sure. I'll speak for Jewish communities that I'm part of, right? We are Jewish communities. Being inclusive to non-Jews, not so important, right? But being inclusive to Jews of color, hugely important, especially in predominantly Ashkenazi white Jewish spaces. Being inclusive to queer Jews, hugely important in heteronormative Jewish spaces, right? So there's different kinds of diversity that we do absolutely want to lift up and make sure, if we don't see them represented, identify why aren't these represented? Is that because these places aren't inclusive of those identities? Is that because those people don't want to be here? Maybe that's fine, but let's figure out why they don't want to be here so that we can know if there's a problem, a way that we're perpetuating oppression that we don't want to be perpetuating. And we can only have those conversations and only make that kind of difference if we're naming identity groups with their accurate labels. And the word diverse doesn't help us in that conversation.
Right. I like that. That's really helpful, actually, to be like, diversity is a priority. It's just, what identities are we talking about in that moment? Yeah. And so being able to name that actually allows you to talk about what you need to be talking about.
Right. I mean, diversity is often a priority. Sometimes it's not, and that's fine. Right. Like, if I'm hanging out with 2 friends and it's a lovely friend group, whatever, there's diversity there isn't diversity there, it doesn't really matter. We're just a couple of friends hanging out, right? If I'm running a big organization that is providing beneficial services that I want people to have access to, diversity absolutely matters, because I don't want to shut people out of that, right? So I think it's all like life, it's contextual.
Totally.
Anyway, I should answer the actual question.
Yeah. Get into the tangible pieces of DEI.
Okay, so you were asking me about like the actual tangible ways that we operationalize DEI in the workplace.
Yes.
Okay. I could talk about this for an hour. I'll try to keep it.
Hey, if you keep yapping, we can edit later.
Awesome. So let's think about this in a couple of categories of work. The one that I'll start with is the one that, like, if I could only do if you said, Natania, DEI has to only be one activity forever. You're only allowed to focus on one kind of initiative and do one thing. What's the highest impact thing that you can do? I'd focus on compensation. So what does that mean? The pay gap is real. The pay gaps are real. They are, in my opinion, I'm very willing to hear alternative opinions about this. I don't think that mine is the only correct opinion, is the biggest thing keeping us from actually having diverse, equitable, inclusive workplaces is that we compensate people differently because of their identities and for no other reason. And oftentimes that is because of systemic inequities in the world. For example, care work pays a heck of a lot less than finance work. Is that because we think that nursing and teaching are less important than managing a stock portfolio? For most people, probably not, right? But that's a symptom of a white supremacist patriarchal society. And so doing pay gap analyses in organizations that focus on a lot of different demographic identities and help organizations see the ways in which people who are part of different demographic groups may be paid differently in their organization for no other reason that they can find other than their identity, I think is the number one most important thing we can do around DEI work. What does that often lead to? Creating pay bands in the organization, helping people understand how their output is tied to different competencies that might be in their pay band, so that if they want to be paid more, they can understand how they need to adjust their output and what skills they might want to work on and develop. Or they can understand that actually the amount they want to be paid isn't available to them at that organization, and they need to switch, or maybe isn't available to them in the field that they're in because they're in an underpaid field. And that's the economy that we're operating in, and their workplace isn't going to change that, so they need to switch field if they want to make more, right? But making that transparent is a huge piece of my work. And that's not, I want to be clear that when I say pay transparency work, I don't mean just snapping my fingers and overnight letting everyone in the organization know how much everybody else makes. In many cases, that's actually pretty harmful to do as a first step in pay transparency, but it's about establishing those pay bands with an organization in the first place, helping them figure out what are the competencies that are tied to different pay bands? How do people navigate that? How do we communicate that to staff? How is that different than how we communicate that to people who are applying for our roles? And how routinely do we do that pay equity analysis in the organization to make sure that we're staying within the bands that we've set out? How does that apply to how we negotiate or not? I'm a strong advocate of not negotiating pay at all. It tends to hugely punish women.
Really?
Oh, yeah. And when I say we, I mean human beings, generally hate when women negotiate with us. And I'm not talking about you, particular person who is listening to this right now, or you, Simran, right? I'm talking about like when we look at the social science, what we see is that women get punished for negotiating. Men get rewarded for it. I know there are more than two genders.
Totally. But the data is often,
the data looks at those two genders, and we can make some great inferences about what that means for non-binary folks.
Yeah,
right?
Totally.
So negotiating benefits men, benefits white people, benefits people who have access to really good training about how to negotiate well, people who have the social capital in the particular negotiation interaction they're having to be able to take the risk on a negotiation, which most organizations that have a lot of money are run by white men. Who has the social capital in a negotiation with a white man? Another white man, right? So we're punishing people who aren't part of these groups that are already overpaid relative to their peers.
Right. And you spend so much time trying to figure out how to best utilize the system that's not made for you, or game the system's not. Because I've definitely heard people tell me, oh, you should negotiate. You shouldn't negotiate. Like, this is how you go into different interviews. Like, this is what, I don't know, just all the different, you never ask your coworkers how much they're paid. Or, you know, in more recent years, I feel like people have been a little bit, or at least I guess in the spaces I operate in, I've heard more people like, oh yeah, you should be talking about that. And what is the right thing to do in these interpersonal relationships versus what is the right thing to do systemically from the organization's actual tactics of how they hire and take care of their employees.
Exactly. So if you, Simran, were to text me next week and say, hey, Natania, we were just talking about negotiations. I have an opportunity to take a gig. What should I do? I would tell you to negotiate.
Right.
right? Like, and I would give you tips because I have an MBA. And so I spent 2 years learning how to negotiate like a white man and then figuring out how to adjust that based on different identities for different social contexts. I would totally coach you through negotiating for more pay. Right? But if I was advising you on how to run your organization and set policy, I would tell you, we've got to figure out how much this particular role should pay given your internal salary band system, and how much value that the output of that role is going to bring to the organization. Set the salary and do not negotiate with people, because that is the equitable way to approach it from the employer side, who actually has the power in that situation. So compensation, huge bucket of
Number
DEI work.
Number one. Okay, totally.
There's a huge tie-in there to the world of people management, which is, I can't prioritize the next couple of buckets, but we're calling it my number 2 bucket for now.
Great. Poop bucket.
Yeah, my poop bucket. One of my chronic illnesses is Crohn's disease. I love talking about poop.
There you go, poop bucket. We have 7th grade humor on this podcast.
Heck yes, my nibbling Emerson will love that. I'll play this part for her if you keep
Excellent.
it in. We talk about poop and her parents hate it. So for my number 2 bucket, people management, there's a tie in there to compensation, right? Because who do you often talk about your compensation with? Your manager, right? That conversation needs to be very well informed by your manager having a strong grasp of really clear behavioral competencies that they're looking for from you, so that they can help you figure out how to navigate that system, how to perform better. That means that a lot of the work that I do around people management is about helping people learn how to give and receive feedback in a more effective and equitable way. So a lot of times, I think in Western society, in America, in white culture especially, which is what shapes our workplaces, so even the people of color who are navigating workplaces have adapted to this, right? We're so afraid of direct, productive feedback.
Yeah.
I think that all feedback should be constructive. I know we talk about feedback as like constructive or positive. I train people managers to make all of their feedback constructive feedback. So if I was to say to you right now, Simran, I love, like, you're hosting this podcast so beautifully. This is so much fun.
Thank you.
Wow, having a great time. Like, sure, I see you smiling right now. That feels good, but it's pretty empty. There's nothing there for you to actually act on, because I'm not naming anything that you're doing that's having an impact on me. So you might leave here being like, heck yeah, I'm a great podcast host. But then when you think about like how you want to adjust your behavior as a podcast host and what you want to keep doing and change, you have no clue. I did not help you at all. That was not constructive. If I was to say to you, oh my God, the way you're making direct eye contact with me while I'm speaking and smiling back at me and asking like really thoughtful off-script questions based on what's coming to you in the moment and what I'm saying, like,
thank you.
You're welcome. Like, makes me feel so heard and was making me feel really confident. Thank you for that. Now you have a thing to do again in the future, right? Should you choose to do that.
And that felt like that was a better feeling compliment.
Good,
you know, like I feel like that also hits, because then you're like, oh, great. Like, these are things that I've intentionally worked on that I want to be doing well. Yeah. So yeah, it's better for everyone.
Right, exactly. And the negative feedback should be the same, right? Not like I'm getting a bad vibe here.
Yeah.
Just usually code for like, I don't know, your identity doesn't make me feel very comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, like, hey, I've noticed that, what's something I've advised someone on recently? When we have meetings together, I'm not getting agendas from you in advance. And that's making it really hard for me to prepare. And I'm somebody who likes to take some time in advance of meetings to prepare so that I can make the best use of your time. Do you think that in the future you could come up with some agendas for me and send your thoughts in advance? That's so much better than like the vibes are off in our meeting, or you're not productive in our meeting, or you're unprofessional, right? So getting really clear with managers especially, but also in terms of managing up, about how do we give helpful feedback to people. This is something that we give better feedback to people who we have closer relationships with. We have closer relationships with people who look like us. That's just how human brains work. It's not because we're bad people. It's because that's how we've evolved, where it's like more natural for us to build relationships with people who we see off the bat we have something in common with. And so it's not about like raising our awareness of that as an issue. It's about actually adopting systems to change that so it doesn't negatively impact those relationships. So training people managers also around like how to interview people well for new hires, how to make decisions in an equitable way, how to do project management more equitably, right? These are all really tangible pieces. The one other one I'll point out that I've been talking about a lot lately, just because I think it's at this point almost a like really sad joke. And when I say joke, I mean I want to like bury my head in the sand and cry, that we're asking ourselves to keep working while our democracy collapses and our neighbors are detained for no reason and our rights are being stripped away. It's just impossible. One of the things I've been working a lot with my clients around is this sense of urgency. We're all, like, I assume if someone's listening to your podcast, they're probably at least baseline familiar with the concept that a core tenet of white supremacy culture is a sense of false urgency, right? And in the circles that I'm in, we talk a lot about that, but we don't do a ton to counteract it.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I work with people managers around a lot in DEI work is prioritization, and what figuring out what we can deprioritize and what systems can we put in place for prioritization so that we can work at a human pace, so that there's room to take time off and take care of ourselves when we need to, so that we can communicate clearly to our staff, like, what do I need from you more immediately? What does immediately mean? Does that mean in an hour? Does that mean at the end of the day? Does that mean at the end of the week? That's DEI work.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's amazing to see, like, you're calling it a false urgency. And I think that that's something that I've really been thinking about recently, because I've been looking at my to-do list and been like, what will actually literally happen if I don't do this today? And the answer is so regularly nothing.
Exactly.
Like, almost always the answer is nothing. Or sometimes the answer will be like, oh, like, it'll make this person's life easier. And then I'll be like, that's a valid reason to do something. Like, there's like, of course, there's some of them that's like, this will make somebody else's life easier. Like, this will help your day tomorrow. Like, there's all those things. But a lot of times, like, the sky isn't going to explode if you don't do this little thing today. And being able to own that and see that. And it doesn't mean that you stop doing the things that you need to do or like totally shut down. But that, like, yeah, being able to have that perspective versus seeing everything as the same level of urgent too is completely unproductive.
Yeah. And also I think, for a lot of the organizations I work with, there are real consequences to not doing a thing right away.
Right.
Right. But I don't work with any hospitals.
Right.
I don't work with doctors' offices. Like, that is a different kind of DEI work. And something that I practice this with myself, with my business manager, so that I can help my clients practice it, is to remind myself, like, I am not working in an emergency room. Mm-hmm. There is no, like, yes, there are real consequences to, like, I don't know, let's say that yesterday I had way too many emails in my inbox. One of them was from you, and it was about our logistics for today.
Yeah.
If I hadn't responded to that, yeah, it would have been a little bit more complicated this morning to figure out our logistics for getting here. Mm-hmm. And so it was probably a good idea that I responded to that yesterday, right? But figuring out realistically, like, what is the impact on other people? What is the impact on my project? If something had blown up yesterday for me and I had said to you, Simran, I can't record the podcast today because something has blown up and is really, really important, that would have been really hard, but it would have been okay.
Yeah.
So recognizing, like, yeah, that's going to have an impact. It's going to delay something, but we can still get it done another time, right? Or we can figure out that, like, if everything is the same level of important, nothing is going to get done, and we're all going to burn ourselves out in the process. So we have to make some decisions there, and giving people vocabulary and tools for doing that is part of what my job is.
And it's so, I feel like you're punching the people pleaser in me in the face right now. Like, I'm like, this isn't systemic. This is about me. Oh. I'm like, you're saying that I should, like, because I'm like, I would die before, like, letting someone down. Like, I have very people pleasing tendencies, but I think that, like, so much of those are, how much of that is because I was raised as a woman or a girl? Like, how much of these things are so systemic too? Like, even the things that feel like personal traits are still at least a little bit rooted in identities or experiences that we've have been in this, like, world that involves systems. And I think that that's so interesting too.
It's also about how the people around you and the systems around you respond when you do those things, right? So you call yourself a people pleaser, which sounds like it's an identity for you. But I wonder, A, how much of that identity is because you're assigned female at birth and raised with those expectations. But on the flip side of that, I wonder how much of it is because you see that rewarded and that has been rewarded by the systems that you're in. And you also see that femme people are often punished for not people pleasing.
Yeah.
And so when I'm working with leaders of organizations, one of the things that we'll often work on is like when we look at what those competencies are for somebody doing well at their job, are we holding people to those standards in an equitable way across identity groups?
Right.
So that if a femme presenting person like you says no to me about something, I'm not punishing them in a disproportionate way in terms of my evaluation of their performance than I am when a masc presenting person does the same thing. And that's leadership responsibility that's totally separate from decisions that you might make about how you prioritize things because of what matters to you.
Yeah. You just so beautifully brought this back to operationalizing DEI, because the way that was just like, fuck this conversation. Let's do a therapy session. Like, tell me, talk to me. Yeah, no, that was perfect. That was perfect.
Well,
yes.
You're talking to somebody who coaches both executives and non-executives. So
Yeah.
I flow back and forth between the two.
Totally. Okay. Is there anything else you want to say about specific tangible stuff before I move us on?
There's a lot of policy work that I do, which is like the nerdy side of me that is most boring when I talk to my friends about it. But you asked, so I'm talking about it here, which is like looking at employee handbooks and making sure that the language that's in there is actually reflective of what the policy is supposed to mean and is not unnecessarily gendered, for example. Looking at the policies that a lot of organizations think they have to have a dress code, right? Or that the parental leave policy has to be different for men than for women. Thinking about like or that we have to have like, oh, we're a tech company, so we have to have unlimited PTO. Like none of those are have-tos.
Right.
There are some have-tos, which I work with employment attorneys to figure out what those are for different organizations. But a lot of DEI work is looking at like, does the policy have to be that way? And if not, what's the right way to structure that for this organization, given what this organization's values are?
You put unlimited PTO in with like dress codes and things like that. And that sounds like it would be a good thing, but I have heard critiques of it. Tell me why.
Unlimited PTO is pretty bad.
Yeah?
The data show us, at least the last time I looked, the data show us that when organizations have unlimited PTO, staff on average take less PTO than organizations where there is a limit. And that's because then staff are left to follow the norms, the cultural norms that are set by leaders who are workaholics generally.
Right.
And also, frankly, you have a lot more freedom in their lives because they have higher income to outsource the care and home maintenance work that lower level staff have to do themselves. So, all like unique characteristics aside, what I tend to default to for organizations when they ask me like, what should we do? Is if you want to have unlimited PTO, great. Set some boundaries around it. Require, for example, that every staff member has to take at least 10 consecutive days off every year, in addition to whatever else they want to do, which basically means a 2-week vacation. Right? And if you don't do that, there's you get docked somewhere, right? Like there's actual policy backing that up. If you make it actually feasible for people to take PTO, right? One of the biggest things that keeps people from taking the time off that they need is that they feel like they can't because, going back to our earlier conversation, everything is urgent and high priority. Right? So make it part of your regular check-ins with staff to ask, when's your next vacation? When do you next need to take time off for sick leave to care for yourself or your family? Unlimited PTO without any of those boundaries or any of those norms leads to burnout, usually. And dress codes are bad because they're oppressive mostly.
Yeah,
unless
totally.
they're for safety reasons.
Yeah, unless you're in a lab and need to wear closed-toed shoes.
Exactly.
But yeah, and they're oppressive and they're always uneven, no matter what. There's always uneven.
Yeah, and they're usually dress codes are about making other people feel comfortable about how people who are from marginalized groups that they're not part of are presenting themselves, which sounds to me a lot like a you problem and not like a me problem. You being the person from oppressor groups who's feeling uncomfortable.
Yeah, and if you trust your employees and the people who work with you well enough to be like, hey, we are going to present ourselves classy today, or I don't know, not needing to be so specific about it. Sure, people know like people know that like if you're gonna have a board meeting, you're not gonna wear sweatpants normally.
Well, some people don't, and that like I've worked with organizations where they do need to give that kind of guidance, but there's ways to give guidance about that isn't a dress code.
Right.
You can say to someone, and often like if you invite me to a party, I want to know what the attire is. Like I don't want to show up in a ball gown if everyone else is in sweats. That's awkward and uncomfortable. So if I'm working with a new client and asked to go to their board meeting, I'm going to ask, like, what's the vibe in terms of clothing? Like, what do people usually wear? Because I want to fit in. Feeling belonging, feeling inclusion makes us feel good.
Yeah.
But the response to that can be, people tend to wear like hard pants, no jeans, or like people tend to wear collared shirts. Like you can give general guidance around that without having to like regulate. Like when I was in 8th grade and we had a rule about how thin your spaghetti straps were allowed to be, right? Like that's different.
I love the way you frame that. It really, I feel like I'm learning a lot about this too, because I'm just like, like that makes so much, because I feel like when I hear, it's so practical. I feel like all the advice you have is so practical in a way that like really feeds my brain. Like I'm like, that makes sense. That like, you can have generalized guidance. Like it's not to say that we like throw it all out the fucking window. It's that like we do not create punitive measures that are meant to oppress people around us. We create generative measures that allow people to find inclusion and feel comfortable in the workplace.
Exactly. And I would add to that, like most of the time, these measures aren't meant to oppress anyone.
Sure.
Right? People, like the leaders that I work with, didn't create dress codes because they wanted to be oppressive.
Right.
They created them because they thought that was the right thing to do. Or they'd had a bad experience where somebody did show up in sweats to a board meeting, didn't think it was wrong, and it was not good.
Right.
Right? And so my job is to help them figure out how to communicate that respectfully and effectively with their colleagues without being punitive about it, right? To help their impact be aligned with their good intentions.
Right. Yeah, because I feel like I can hear like my grandmother being like, "Oh, so now you just want to wear sweatpants in the board meeting?" And I'm like, "Not exactly, Natania. Natania told me how to do it, so
there you go.
It's more complicated than that."
Exactly. Use me as backup with your grandma.
Yeah, perfect.
And then, so bucket four, really quickly. I know I've been talking about this forever.
No, please.
Is like the stuff that people often think of when they think of classic DEI work, which you'll notice I haven't talked about at all, because in many ways I think it's often the least impactful and important, which isn't to say it's not important. I love this work, but I think the other work often has a bigger impact. And if we're able to do all of these things, bucket 4 is great, which is doing things like gathering data about what problems we're actually trying to solve as related to DEI in our workplaces. So I often do surveys with my clients that look like employee experience surveys and are also asking employees about their demographic identities, so that on the back end, we can see where there's correlation between different identity groups having different experiences in the workplace. Of course, you can't do that with really tiny workplaces. For that, you need interviews and focus groups. But when workplaces are big enough, that allows us to see things like, oh, wow, it looks like a really classic one is women are much more likely than men to say that they feel like administrative work that isn't assigned an owner is distributed fairly among staff, right? That work always falls to women.
Right.
So women will say, yeah, that's not distributed fairly. And men, and I'm making huge generalizations here. I am sure there are many listeners who fall on the opposite side of this spectrum, but we're talking about big data.
Yeah.
Men will say, oh, no, it's distributed totally fairly because we don't socialize boys to be aware of that work.
Right.
So when we survey and look at what those differences are, then we're actually able to name, here are the problems we're trying to solve, where the impact that leadership and our workplace systems are having on our employees are different from what our intention is. And that helps us build strategies that actually address the problems we have instead of whatever trendy thing is happening in DEI that we think our workplace should probably be doing, which gets me to the other big topic under DEI work, which is often something like working with DEI councils and employee resource groups and affinity groups, which I love. I love these groups. They're some of my favorite people to work with. They're really bought into the work and they have nerdy conversations like this with me. Yeah. And also those groups can't get DEI work done on their own. Right? When we're doing work with those groups, we often end up siloing DEI work where it actually needs to be operationalized in the entire organization. So a lot of the work that I do with those groups is about giving them the tools that they need to create experiences for themselves that feel really good and fulfilling and are moving them towards having more equitable experiences at work, and taking off of their shoulders the responsibility that they're not getting paid for, right? Which is to make their organization more diverse, equitable, and inclusive.
Yeah, that's so interesting because I think it comes back to not just workplaces, but like universities. Like I remember I sat on my like a diversity, equity, and inclusion group of our student government. But you're right, it gets siloed. It becomes, okay, these are the kids who are sitting here talking about this all day, but everything else is business as usual. And so there's not actually this process, this operationalizing process in the greater system. It's just like, should we host an event? You know, like a one-off thing.
And how many white men were on that council?
There were not.
Yeah,
there were not.
My point.
Yeah.
We can't move DEI work forward if not everybody is involved in it.
Right.
Like, this is everybody's responsibility. And when we put it on the shoulders of people who are already part of groups that are being undervalued and oppressed in our workplaces, we're taking their time away from being able to do the work that pays them, which means they're less likely to get promoted, which means we're perpetuating the pay gap instead of helping to liberate ourselves from it. So I'm in favor of DEI councils and affinity groups existing.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that we're not putting the responsibility of furthering DEI onto those groups.
Right. So how do you feel like DEI fits into the reproductive justice universe and the reproductive justice world?
In a huge way. There's, for a lot of reasons, one of them is unless we have access to significant generational wealth, the unwillingness of our government to provide a robust social safety net for us means that our place of work is the biggest determining factor for most of us in terms of our access to the freedoms that reproductive justice wants us to have, right? Our employer is where we get the money to pay our bills and care for our families, and where we get access to healthcare.
Yeah.
Right? That's huge. Our employer is also the determinant of, for most of us, of how our day is structured. And so DEI work, the work of making our workplaces more aligned with our organizational values, is then if we have leaders who value reproductive justice, then DEI work is moving organizations closer to RJ values. I do want to be explicit, that DEI work isn't justice work, right? That DEI work is happening inside of institutions that exist within capitalism. And as long as capitalism exists, we do not have liberation. Right. This is an unjust system. And so the DEI work that I do is really different than the activism work that I do that I'm not paid for, right? Like I sit on the board of, we'll plug for Jews for Racial and Economic Justice, JFREJ, if you live in New York City and you're a lefty Jew, check it out.
Woo!
Thank you. That is liberatory work,
yeah,
right? Like we're trying to create mutual aid group, like communities that exist, that model the liberatory communities that we hope to build as the world is burning.
Right.
That's really different than the work I'm doing with organizations where we're constrained by capitalism, which is what it is, right? That is the system that we're operating inside of, and we can totally make progress inside of that, which is why I do my job. But we have to recognize that having good intentions and having RJ values doesn't mean that our leadership is going to be RJ aligned. And that's because our workplaces are operating inside of white supremacy culture. That's because modern day human resources as a function is a descendant of the slave trade and of policing, right? Like HR is designed to help an employer control its employees. That's not liberatory, right? It's because capitalism, as we talked about earlier, overvalues male-dominated career paths and undervalues care work. And so because workplaces are places where all of those forces are in effect, we need DEI work to help counteract that.
Right.
And it's only taking us, so much of the way.
Right. Like a DEI work can get you the best insurance program for people within their workplace. But the deeper question is, why the fuck is my health insurance connected to my workplace?
Exactly. Hit the nail on the head. Yes.
I see. Okay. Yeah. Wow. So also the way you talk about HR is like, I want to hear more about that.
I mean, there's people in HR who can talk about this way more eloquently than I can, but I think, if you want like a recent example, the way that you get certified in HR, the credential that most workplaces will look for when they're hiring an HR person, is through through SHRM, the Society of Human Resources Management. And SHRM just took DEI off of their webpage. They're doing away with equity work. So, and most HR professionals who I work with care deeply about equity work and want guidance around it, right? They're not bad people because they got SHRM certified. One of my best friends is SHRM certified and she's amazing at what she does.
Right.
That's what you got to do to move forward, but it's not a field that is designed to work towards liberation. And so recognizing that like that's where these systems are designed from, and that's where we're getting best practices from, shows you how much work we need to do to get to actually values-aligned workplaces.
So for you as a DEI consultant and other people who are working in this world, your role is kind of shifting to what you're talking about, like changing language, making things able to be said and continue to do the work without having that explicit DEI process. Do you feel like that's like fundamentally changed what your work looks like, or do you feel like it's just another piece?
My work hasn't fundamentally changed since I started doing it in 2017.
Yeah.
The way I talk about my work has shifted a lot, and I actually started thinking about talking about my work differently in like 2022. When I realized I noticed this like a few times in a row over the years where I'd be mid-engagement, like really deep in the process with a long-term client, and a leader, like often a CEO or someone in the C-suite, who was maybe initially a little skeptical of DEI, but bought in enough to go along with the process, would say to me something like, and in a way that you could tell they were like, should I say this? I don't know if it's okay. You know, they would say, Natania, is this DEI work? Like, this is not what I imagined this work would be. This just feels like you're helping our organization run better.
Right.
Like you're teaching us best practices for running an organization. And then when this happens, which it continues to happen, I get to say, yeah, buddy, that's what DEI work is. So because of that, one of the things I started to think about a few years ago was like, I'm not a marketing expert. I took marketing in business school for a quarter.
Right.
But I have common sense. And one of the things I know from my common sense in that one marketing class is that you have to describe, in order to get new clients, you've got to describe your work using the language that the people who have the problem you're trying to solve use to describe their problem. And so I have shifted to actually calling my work values-aligned people strategy.
I like that.
Thanks. Yeah, it took a while to come up with the term, but I settled on it because that is what I do.
Right.
Like I help organizations with their strategies as related to managing people in a way that helps them run their organizations in ways that are operationalizing their values, that are aligned with their values. And for a lot of organizations, that looks like what some people think of when they think of DEI work. And for others, it doesn't. I think all of it is DEI work, but it doesn't really matter what I think it is. What matters is that the organizations I'm helping are getting what they want out of it, and that I'm helping them operate in a more values-aligned way.
Yeah, I really like that reframing of it.
Thank you.
And that makes me think about one of the things I wanted to ask you about was just how much I've heard critiques of DEI in leftist spaces. And, you know, it's one of those things where I feel like my conception of DEI, even from like college and stuff, I was like, I don't know about all this. But then it comes under attack and you're like, wait a minute, that's not what I said. That's not what I meant. Like, I don't want you to get rid of it. But I do still think it's important for us to talk about those weaker points of it that have historically been done and how we can be doing this work better, while also understanding that there is a very major attack going on around DEI work, and that's also relevant.
Yeah. I think the reasons why that happens are actually things we have talked about in this conversation already. So let's like bring them back in this context. I have critiques of DEI from a leftist, like I am the extent that I am a leftist space because I'm a leftist person.
Yeah.
I have critiques of DEI too. And it gets back to the fact that, you know, in the beginning I said two Jews, three opinions, 100 DEI consultants, 100 definitions of what DEI is, right? Like, we use this term to describe a lot of work. When I say values-aligned people strategy, when I say DEI, I am talking about work that helps us stop perpetuating oppression in our workplaces. There is a lot of work that happens in the name of DEI that perpetuates oppression in workplaces. And I think that is why DEI often gets a really bad name. Let's lift up what that actually means. When I talked earlier about DEI councils that have no white men on them, right? That's perpetuating oppression, because you're asking the people of color in your workplace, you're asking the women in your workplace to take time away from the things that allow them to get promotions and put it into making your workplace a better place for everybody, instead of actually just making that somebody's paid job, right? That's perpetuating oppression, unless you make DEI everyone's responsibility, which is something that I do when I work with organizations. If an organization has a process for setting annual goals, I say, great, everybody here gets an annual goal related to DEI. And you can't move forward unless you are contributing to making the organization more diverse, equitable, and inclusive. So participating in your affinity group or the DEI council is one great way to do that. And there are other ways to do that too, like running more equitable meetings when you're the person in charge, like working with your executive coach on interrupting less, because that is a problem that you have as a white man and you know that you want to work on it, right? Like, really making this everyone's responsibility is the way to stop perpetuating oppression. Siloing it is the way to perpetuate it. There are tons of other ways that this happens too. I think when we were talking earlier about speaking in euphemisms, talking about people as diverse, I see HR departments talk a lot about their diversity hiring initiatives instead of naming, like, we have a real problem in this organization that we have 200 people and one of them is Black, right? Like, shoot, what is happening for you? Especially if you're located in a metropolitan area, right? Like, what's going on culturally for you? I don't want you to have a diversity hiring initiative. I want you to be doing DEI work that's looking at anti-Black racism in your organization, right? So not speaking in euphemisms and instead actually talking about the real problems you have. Oftentimes the harmful DEI work that we see is euphemistic DEI work that's afraid to actually talk about the problem itself.
Yeah, and that makes people feel like nobody wants to be a diversity hire in that way either. Like, it doesn't feel good to be like, am I here because of that? And so, like, actual intentional DEI work does step you away from that idea too, that like, oh, we're just trying to fill a quota. You're here because we're trying to avoid looking like we're doing the wrong thing.
And calling someone diverse implies that there are people who are not diverse, which is like hugely problematic and also factually untrue.
Right.
Like, if you want to call me diverse because I'm the first Jewish person you've hired in your organization, that's actually, like, maybe I'm adding religious diversity to your organization, but the only way that I, as a human being, and anybody else as a human being is diverse is that we have a diversity of different kinds of, like, organisms and cells in our bodies, right? I'm one person. I can't be diverse or not diverse. And by calling someone not diverse, what we're telling them is you have no role to play in the DEI work in this organization, which is so untrue. There are also probably, like, each of us carries multiple social identities. And for the vast majority of people, some of those identities are part of historically marginalized groups, and some of those identities are part of historically oppressor groups. And to put us in this binary of diverse or not diverse erases the nuances of people's identities that make us interesting, wonderful people to connect with.
Yeah, I feel like I've heard similar things done with the word intersectional. Like,
yes.
I think I saw an article that was like years ago, but that was like, oh, Elizabeth Warren is the most intersectional candidate. What the fuck does that mean?
That means nothing.
It means nothing. It means literally nothing. And like, yeah, like as though white people and men don't have identities, as if straight people don't have identities, rather than acknowledging that those are full identities.
Totally.
That exist and you are not a default, and everything else is other to that default.
Exactly. Yeah, so I think those are just some ways that, like, well-meaning DEI work often just goes awry and has a negative impact.
So what do you think gets in the way of these well-meaning organizations, like people who really do care about DEI or want to bring it in, being able to do it effectively?
Well, one we've talked about a lot, which is that those good intentions just aren't enough.
Yeah.
Right? Like, in nonviolent communication and in feedback, we teach, like, it doesn't matter that you didn't mean to step on my toe. You stepped on my toe.
Yeah.
Like your intention is irrelevant to the fact that my toe really hurts right now.
Right.
And so what matters is that you take ownership of the fact that you stepped on my toe and then you figure out how to not do it again.
Yeah.
Because my toe can't handle more stepping. Right? So in that same way, like anybody's good intentions don't usually result in actual good leadership. We usually need systems to hold us accountable to behaving in ways that are aligned with those good intentions. And so I think one of the things that I see happen a lot, especially in growing organizations, is that when they start out and they're really small, it's easier. Those good intentions can take you a lot further because it's just a few people, right? But as soon as you start to grow, you have a lot less control, and those good intentions can only get you so far, and you haven't put systems in place to operationalize those good intentions, and so you start to slip, and your impact starts to slip. And so the thing that I see really getting in the way in those instances is that there's a failure to put systems in place to operationalize values, and in some cases there's a failure to articulate values, which makes it impossible to actually operationalize them at all.
Right.
The other thing that gets in the way is these changing cultural trends that we talked about, where because temporarily able-bodied straight white men often don't feel that every moment of every day need for DEI work to be happening because workplaces were designed for them, they take money away from the work. And that I think the cycle that we've seen in the last 5 years is top of mind for a lot of people, right? The COVID pandemic started to hit in February, March of 2020.
Yeah.
For me and most of my colleagues, we heard from almost all of our clients, we have to pause our DEI work right now because the economy is so uncertain that we have to take money away from everything that's not essential. We were just like sitting on our hands, right? Then the Black Lives Matter protests after George Floyd's murder started, and those same companies came back to us and said, hey, you know how you've been telling us for a few years now that you think we should like really dive into this deep DEI work that we haven't had funding for and that we paused? We're ready to do that work now. And so they put all of this money into it, and we got to have a huge, fantastic impact. Some of us for a year, some of us for 2 years, if we were lucky 3. Yeah. And then we started to see it slip. And then since Trump was elected, right, we're seeing that crash.
Right.
That's just 5 years.
Right.
That has been happening for decades. And so there's a huge challenge in developing any kind of longitudinal data about the sustained impact of DEI work. And because of that, leaders are usually unwilling to invest in something that there isn't data to show how effective it is. We can't develop the data to show how effective it is if you won't fund it in the long term.
Right.
So this is a cyclical problem that means that there's usually unwillingness from leadership to invest in DEI, even when these are all leaders who have quote unquote good intentions around DEI work. None of them would say that they're racist or homophobic or sexist, right? Those aren't explicit beliefs that they hold. But when push comes to shove and they have to make decisions about their budget, they're letting this work go. Yeah. And that really harms the long-term impact of it.
Yeah, and we're in such a notable political moment with that. Like the cultural wind it's blowing right now. And I think that when I hear about companies like Target being like, all right, we're going to preemptively get rid of our DEI, I'm like, y'all were just looking for a reason to do that. Yeah. And now you got your reason. But it also is so interesting what you're talking about, where it's like, that feels really insidious to me. Like you were looking to get rid of DEI and then you had an opportunity to, but there's like this almost spinelessness of like, okay, but then there's another political moment that makes you think that DEI is important because it's important to the people right now. And then you get rid of it again because it's not important anymore because you're told that you should get rid of it. And I'm like, oh, you don't even give a shit.
That is definitely how those of us who are directly impacted by it are experiencing it.
Yeah.
What I know from talking to the people who are making those decisions in the moments that they're making them is that they feel quite trapped and they often just don't know how to navigate those moments. Mm-hmm. And from the outside, it looks spineless.
Yeah.
And it has a really terrible impact and they need to take ownership of that. But in the moment for them, my experience of talking to them, and this is not to justify their behaviors, is just to think about like how we can help them change, right? Is like, it's not a decision that's made lightly. They often feel shitty about it, but they don't know what else to do.
Yeah.
And I think my job and the job of people who are in this industry and who are advising people is to establish the strong advisory relationships with them so that in those moments we can get in and say, let's talk about what the impact, like I see that you're considering making this decision. Let's talk about what the actual impact of that might be to employee retention in your organization, right? Let's look at the metrics that you care about and think about maybe we do need to scale back this work and we can't keep it as robust as it's going to be. Fine, that's happening to all of your work, but do you need to get rid of it entirely? And what are the core pieces of it that you could keep that might not be the flashiest pieces? It might not be your DEI council and your affinity groups. Maybe it's your annual pay equity audit. But how can you communicate that to your staff in a way that explains, we really care about DEI.
Yeah.
We want to keep running an equitable organization. Here are the things we are committing to continuing to do. And we know these are high impact things. And here's our plan for how we're going to scale back up when we have more money to scale all of our operations back up.
So in this like hostile political moment, I feel like, your advice to people is that like, don't scrap it, find ways to integrate it into your work and keep committing to that work, maybe in a way that is less in your face.
Maybe I would say maybe in ways that are less in your face if that's part of the necessity for you to survive.
Sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. Right? Like that's common sense.
Yeah.
But in terms of thinking about like what to invest in when your budget is limited, I think the choices you make there are just as important as how you communicate about those choices. So one of the things I'm advising my clients on constantly is not just the substance of the work we're doing, but how we're communicating it to staff, because they're equally as important. If you do a pay equity analysis and you figure out what your salary bands are and then you don't tell your staff about it, there's barely any impact there, right? Maybe there's an impact in terms of adjusting pay, which is great, but you need to tell people about that so that they can feel good, right? And they can know how to navigate the organization. That's how the inclusion part happens. Otherwise, you've got equity and nothing else. So when we're thinking about how to spend a limited budget or a budget that's getting, that needs to get cut, a lot of times leaders want to do the thing that they're getting the most pressure to do from staff who are really attached to the flashy thing they're doing, right? Which might be like the pride celebration. As a queer person who loves a good pride celebration, I would say that's actually a pretty bad investment for most organizations. Because it makes people feel included for a day. But it doesn't actually, like, I'm more interested in you making sure that your paid family leave policy covers queer families.
Right.
And adoption, and that you have options available for people to get pregnant in all the kinds of different ways people can get pregnant and make families, right? Like that's more meaningful for queer people than a float in the Pride Parade.
Totally.
And if you have a choice between spending money on a consultant who's going to advise you on LGBTQ inclusive policies versus spending money on a float at the Pride Parade, do the quiet one. That's what's going to have the impact, but communicate to your staff about it and celebrate it. You can celebrate that for free. Right? You can have a celebratory email that goes out that talks about your fantastic, inclusive, new parental leave policy. And then you can celebrate the queer families that grow in your organization.
No
right?
float necessary.
Exactly. We don't need a float for that.
Well, this was amazing, Natania. Do you have any final thoughts that you want to share to the people who are listening?
I feel like this has been such a comprehensive and joyful conversation, and I'm so appreciative of that.
I learned a lot. I really feel like I did. I really do. So I really appreciate you coming here and talking to me about this. And, my mom just bought like 100 cans of beans from Costco, and that's because their DEI stuff didn't go away.
Hey.
She wouldn't have done that otherwise. She wouldn't be doomsday prepping with the same passion if they had gotten rid of their DEI.
Everybody go to Costco. That's our takeaway.
Go to Costco, buy 100 beans. You need them.
No, also please visit your locally owned stores in your community.
Yeah, they have beans too. They have lots of beans. You can get it there.
Thank you, Simran. It's been such a pleasure.
Thanks, Natania. Thanks for listening to this episode of Fuck, Marry, Kill. Did you love learning from Natania as much as I did? They'd love to help more folks in our community. Click the link to Natania's contact form in the show notes below and let them know that you heard about them on this podcast for a free consultation. You can also sign up for their newsletter at www.nmgazek.com. That's www.nmgazek.com. And follow them on Instagram at nmgazek_strategy. See our show notes for links to all of these.